Hello, everybody, and welcome to Lesson 7 of our quarterly. We're going to start talking about the mission to our neighbor. My name is Monique, and my neighbor here today is Eric, and our pastor, Sasha. So guys, the first thing that jumped out to me on this page was the verse from the Galatians. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? So that tells me that to God, love is so natural, all it takes is sight. To only see somebody is enough to love them. Yet we're in a current climate in society where to see somebody, you hate them. So guys, what's that all about?
Well, it's like comparing because you have two basic commandments in the Torah, I would say. And Jesus basically is pointing them out. One is love your God, and the other one is love your neighbor. God is invisible. So the neighbor is definitely visible. What we see here in Galatians is a kind of rhetorical way of it's kind of rabbinic rhetoric, I would say. In rabbinic rhetoric, you often have like something like this. It's a rhetoric of comparison. If something which is easier or smaller is true, then something which is bigger or harder is more so true. So basically, this is not about love first sight here in the text. This is about, well, we're able to love the neighbor. And so if we're able to love the neighbor, more so we'll be able to love God. Or the vice versa is true. If we don't like neighbor, then how can we love God?
Okay, and you said rabbinic? Like, so this is like a teaching tool that's like often used?
Yeah. This is... Okay. When we read the New Testament text, which is very unique in a sense, because on the one hand it's written in Greek, that's the original is, but on the other hand it is written by Jews. And here is Paul. He is Jewish. He was born in Tarsus, which is not a territory of Judea. So the territory is Greek-speaking. So he's perfect in Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew. But doesn't matter which language Jews are speaking, even today. I come from a Jewish family which speaks Russian. Here in America, there are Jewish families that been here for 3-4 generations. They speak English, but in many ways the thinking remains the same. And sometimes I watch in the Jewish culture where people are not Jewish and speak they hear perfect American English, and they listen to some of these Jewish saying, they say, what does it mean? I understand every word, but I don't make a sense of it, because it's kind of it's English, but it's spoken in a very Jewish way, which is culturally. So, and it's because there is a certain rhetoric. I have a harder time giving a specific American Jewish example, but I have always been like, with my mother. Like, my mother would say as a joke, Sasha, if you do something like this, I'm going to kill you right away.
Yeah.
So my mother-in-law could not stand this rhetoric, and she would say to my mother, Ludmila, please, you cannot say this. Well, as a children, we're so used to hearing this that it doesn't mean anything what my mother-in-law hears it. It's just totally different ways. And so these are type of rhetorics, back in first century BC, first century AD, you can read the rabbinic literature, different rabbinic documents, and you can constantly see this rhetorics. And so as a scholar, when I read New Testament text, I can see, that's the same logic. I would give you a simple example. Look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet the Heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more value than they? You see, the birds are small, and if it's true that God feeds them, more so He's going to feed you. So the same way, if it's true that you are capable of loving your neighbor, then you will be capable of loving God. And vice versa is going to work. So it starts with the neighbor and then translates into God. This is the message which Paul says. If you don't know how to love your neighbor, you won't be able to know how to love God.
So then the question is kind of what I think Monique's hitting on. There's so much of society doesn't even talk to their neighbors. They don't even know their neighbors' name. Like, how many people live in an apartment building with the same people for like 30 years, and they're like, I have no idea who that is across the hall.
Yeah.
But so if we don't even know our neighbors, we don't talk to our neighbors, we don't have a relationship with our neighbors, we don't know how to love their neighbors, how can you have a relationship with God if by the context is like, can you have a relationship of love with God if you don't have a relationship of love with your neighbor or your community, something along those lines?
That's a very good point, especially when we talk about neighbors literally.
Right.
And sometimes it's not easy because you move into the neighborhood. Like in our case, we recently moved into the neighborhood. We're kind of slowly meeting different neighbors. At least we're very glad that our immediate neighbors, we met them, and they're very friendly. But here in the West, people love to keep privacy, so that makes it a little bit challenging. But the word neighbor needs to be viewed as a little broader than just the one who is next door, next house to you. It's neighbors are everywhere. Neighbors, for us, believers, your fellow believers are probably closer neighbors than your just the next door neighbors, because you already share common beliefs. That's why you choose the church or the community of faith, because you have a shared value. I don't know. We're nice, but it's not. It takes slowly to understand what kind of values our next door neighbors have. But at least we are very happy that most of our next door neighbors on Halloween, that's my test of values.
Yes, a fair test.
So I did test my neighborhood, and I'm so happy that only few houses put up the cemetery displays and all kinds of stupid skeletons on Halloween, which makes me very, very happy. Back in Vancouver or Battleground, Washington, where we moved from, sometimes I would go around the neighborhood where we were every single house except my next door neighbor, who was a Russian-speaking Pentecostal Christians. We were like a black sheep in this neighborhood. Everybody else, like my across the road neighbor, such a great neighbor, always helps stuff like this. But boy, they love this crazy stuff. Although I know for sure they did not take it serious, and actually they were Christians. But some other people I knew, their beliefs were really, really, really strange. But I'm happy to see here in my neighborhood a shared value. But when I come into the church, then it's obvious that I'm coming to the place where values are even more shared. So, the bottom line is we have to take the word neighbor a little broader. And that's why in the Gospel of Luke, who is your neighbor? The question is.
So in that same context, so neighbor, if they're not talking about more direct neighbors, what are they referencing specifically then? Because it's like, I can understand it not directly neighbors. Are we talking about like church community? Are we talking about like how broad is that and how narrow of a scope is that? Is it kind of the reason why like a lot of Jewish communities, like Orthodox Jews, live like within like walking distance of synagogue and they're like always that tight-knit community type scenario? Is that like the better version of like community and neighbors, or is like does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Orthodox Jews indeed create a very tight-knit and very insular neighborhoods, and their neighbors, relatives, and they're in each other's business. This is this is a totally different game, when you come to an Orthodox Judaism, especially Hasidic Judaism. That's why, many people, many Christians ask me, how hard it is to bring the gospel to ultra-Orthodox Jews. And the hardest thing for the ultra-Orthodox Jew, I know few ultra-Orthodox Jews in New York who actually believe in Jesus. But they're doing it in such a secret that because they are afraid to be expelled from their community, because the way how the community is made, that these people really are not able to survive by themselves. In other words, that's the biggest thing. It's like you can watch some documentaries, but it's not about Christians. It's actually about LGBT community, how they have a special rehab centers for Hasidic Jews who want to come out of the Hasidic community, and these rehab centers teach them to actually live in the real world, because they're extremely educated, but all their education is designed to keep them inside the community, and so you have to do a job training. I'm kind of looking, they go from one extreme to all the way another, from ultra conservative to ultra liberal values. But I was looking at these documentaries and I was like saying, this is why it never worked, because I had an experience in New York when I met ultra-Orthodox Jews and I witnessed to them, but it was very hard to actually, bringing them from a tight-knit Orthodox Jewish community to an Adventist church community is next to impossible. We are not, as an Adventist, we're not prepared to help and support, a person like this. Like, again, I come from an immigrant community. So a Russian or Ukrainian church, especially, give an example, let's say a Sacramento area, lots of Russian-speaking, lots of Ukrainian-speaking churches. And when the refugees from the war began to pour through Mexican border, it was, the whole system, community was set up to help them adjust. People would, somebody helped them across the border, somebody helped them find their rent, somebody helped them, we kind of knew because it was culturally similar, and we knew where they come from because we've been there and we know, and we have experience of adaptation from there to here. We were able to help them adapt.
So you're kind of like changing their perspective of their neighbors. So they went from like a community to now they're just like, they're relying on people. I don't know how to. So they've kind of just developed it. So the idea of neighbor is like just constantly developing. It's like people who help you or people who are around you, or it seems like the lawyer's question actually wasn't in vain, because truly, like who is my neighbor?
Yes, the lawyer's question is definitely an interesting question, and it goes back to the text which the second most important commandment Jesus taught. And by the way, in Luke, it's the Pharisees who taught the same thing. Just for a little note for our listeners, on the questions of which is the most important commandment in the law, Jesus and Pharisees were on the same page. So in Matthew and Mark, Jesus answers to the Pharisee and says, the first commandment is love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, which is Deuteronomy 6:4-5. And love your neighbor as yourself, which is Leviticus 19:18. And then in Gospel of Luke, Jesus asks the lawyer, what does the Torah say? And the lawyer says, love your God, love your neighbor. And then he goes back to Leviticus 19:18, and here what it says in the text. It says, "You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." So the question, do you see how can you read this commandment? You see why he asks this question, who is my neighbor?
I think so.
No.
I know.
There's so much to it, right? If you're gonna look for a question, there's a lot to see, because on one hand, it's like I understand where the lawyer is coming from. Like, if this is a genuine question, I see it. But then on the other hand, like the answer is like so simple that for us to even sit here and unbraid it like this, it just kind of seems a little bit whimsical. So it's like, do we need to dig so deep? Like, is it that serious, or should we just simplify it and be like, you know what, it doesn't really matter?
Well, it is serious. It is serious because is this love your neighbor as yourself related to your people, which means Jews? Or is it not limited to the Jews only? That's the original Eric's question.
Right.
Like when Eric started asking me about Orthodox Jewish community, and the church community, it is easy to become a neighbor inside the community where you share your faith, and then you have your relatives, and then you have some long-time friends, and you know somebody. It is much easier than going inside the neighborhood and, hello, I just moved in here. And, I don't know if there is this, if this saying of realtor is a realtor saying here is known in Minnesota, but they say, don't buy the house, buy your neighbors.
I've heard it.
That makes sense, though.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's also the phrase, good fences make good neighbors.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it's a thing.
That's the good phrase for something like Saskatchewan. I drove through some of the areas, and I see these houses, and then the neighbor is, and I think, what is going to happen if some elderly family lives in this house? It's a farmhouse, and somebody needs medical attention. Will they be able to have some help soon enough?
True. That's the danger.
Yeah. So, but I say it's harder. So Jesus takes it really, really to the extreme, because who ended up being a neighbor in this parable, who ended up being a real neighbor?
The Samaritan. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, Samaritan. I don't know if you understand who real Samaritans are.
I don't.
Well,
So they just have like different beliefs or
no.
live on the wrong side of the river?
Okay. Let me give it a version which is similar in the modern world, but I was just watching the testimonies of some Americans who survived this Hamas terror attack. Okay? And they're all American citizens, but, they're Jews and they have dual citizenship, American and Israeli. That's why, when they say, when you hear on the news, it is American citizens who were taken hostage. It is American citizens who, they're Israeli Jews, but born in America or for whatever reason having American passports most of the time. So so they're explaining what was happening. It was terrible, like it was a big music festival, people were having fun. People were camping in tents and cars, and these terrorists were coming with machine guns, just spraying the camp, spraying with bullets, all these, Potter potties, where people, it was just so cruel, so gruesome. And people were running away wherever. The worst thing you would want to run in this situation, being an Israeli, into some village inside the Gaza Strip or nearby, right? Because where do you expect to be killed? Out there, because the terrorists are coming from there. But so what I'm saying is, I'm just explaining to you the degree of animosity between Jews and Samaritans, because it's a very similar than the degree of animosity between Israelis and people from Gaza. Just there was a big hatred. And it was for a very similar reasons, because these people in Samaria, they were resettled in this region by Babylonian and Assyrian kings, and they were very hostile to the Jews. In fact, we read in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah how they were putting all kinds of obstacles to rebuilding the temple, rebuilding Jerusalem, all kinds of bad things. Nehemiah was praying to God constantly. They had to stand guard on the walls with swords because these Samaritans would attack them, and on and on and on. So they were not friends. And plus, Samaritan community is very insular. It's even more insular than Hasidic community in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Because
What's that mean?
Williamsburg, Brooklyn,
Well, okay, the city, that's a city. That's okay.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
But you said it's called a what?
Insular, just
Insulated.
isolated. I mean,
Isolated.
yeah.
So it has like a wall around it?
No, they live in a bubble. How Adventists kind of just live in a bubble, and they only know the perspective of other Adventists. Those people.
Okay.
Same thing.
Well, think not Adventist.
Well, something that one can relate to.
Think, think Amish.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That's a good example, too.
Okay.
Well, what I'm just saying, Jewish community has Hasidic Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Christian community has Amish. People the same way. They want to insulate themselves from the world.
Okay.
I remember this conversation, I come and I'd never seen Amish people before, and I look at these people, they're riding on a bus and they're dressed in costumes of early 19th century whatsoever. I just look and, I'm trying to ask them something, and they're kind of like this, and I say, why you, and they say, you're English. And I'm saying to them, I'm not English, I'm Russian. It doesn't matter. You're English. Because in their in their worldview, there is them, Amish, and everybody else is English.
Oh.
So English is, that's how they call the outside world. They have this rules that you can't drive the car. So when the late teenager wants to have a taste of English world, they let him loose. But if he wants to go back, eventually, okay, take off your watch, throw away your iPhone, and sell your car, and then put on, grow the beard, put on this type of trousers, and have a suspenders, and put a hat, and now you're real Amish. Take an axe and make a furniture. That's the culture. That's the insular culture in the Christian world. But Hasidic is the same. It's very similar. Hasidic. That's why I gave you example. Williamsburg, Brooklyn, because I've lived in Brooklyn, and you see some of this different, very, very, insular Hasidic community. They won't let, to them, I'm Jewish, but to them, I'm not.
Oh, see, I thought I knew what it was. I didn't, but now.
Right. Yeah, so Samaritans is even worse.
Okay, so then when the lawyer's asking the question, would it be accurate to kind of assume that he's already thinking about the Samaritans? Is it the kind of the current events of the time? They already know those are enemies.
Yeah, of course. Right. This is the issue. Samaritans were not absolutely friendly. We're absolutely not friendly with Jews. It's just let's say this poor fellow who is laying, and he sees the priest and Levite pass by, and then he sees Samaritan approach, and he's gonna get, oh boy, this guy is gonna even, I'm half dead. This guy is gonna and half naked. This guy is gonna really strip me fully naked and kill me. This is because of such a attitude, such a relationship. But what Jesus is trying to teach us is that being a neighbor can come from anywhere. Someone whom you least expect can become your neighbor, and someone whom you expect supposed to be a neighbor may not actually happen to be one. And so be prepared.
Okay, so along this line of love your neighbor like you love yourself, what did Jesus say? You shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's Matthew 22:39. So now the question is, how do we love ourselves? Because this is another question. There are plenty of people that don't take care of themselves, that don't like who they are, that want to change themselves. So if we constantly are unhappy with ourselves, and we don't love ourselves, how do we love our neighbors the way Jesus intended us to love our neighbors if we don't even love ourselves?
Yeah, the low self-esteem issue.
Partially, yeah.
Yes, unfortunately, that's why.
Well, alcohol, drugs,
of course,
all sorts of things. People destroy themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, that's part of a problem. We don't love ourselves, and being addicted to being an alcoholic or drug user, you're not a good neighbor. That's why you look at the neighborhood and you will find people who don't love themselves. It will be very hard to settle and move into this neighborhood.
Right.
But on the other note is, sometimes one of the issue here in what Jesus is teaching about the Torah is different commandments take priority. For example, saving life takes priority over keeping Sabbath. That's why when a doctor needs to go to perform surgery, cesarean section, when somebody cannot give birth, and it happens to be that he is being bipped during the church service, he gets up and he goes and does everything to save the life of mother and baby. And he's fine because this goes before. As you can see here, Jesus put love to God as the first priority, but loving neighbor as your second priority. So our devotion to God goes first, because God helps us to love ourselves properly, and that helps us to love our neighbors properly. That's why God has to be first. What Galatians is showing, it's kind of the opposite. If we choose to be hateful to our neighbors, we can't love God with that kind of attitude. But as you, Eric, says, as yourself, God help us to change our nature, our character, so that we would properly love ourselves. And that's why we can project the love to the neighbors. And God can help us to meet our neighbors where we are, to be helpful, to be a good example of Christ's love in our neighborhood, and eventually being able to contact our neighbors with good news. But I keep bringing back this passage from Ministry of Healing, and in this passage it talks about Christ's method alone, as Ellen White points it, and it starts with several steps. And step number 1 is mingles with people. So we need to do our best to mingle with our neighbors and, be respectable in our neighborhood, for sure. And that will give us the next step. He identified the needs, so we try to help. This builds, so respect transfers into trust. So when our neighbors trust us, then we can bring the good news to them, and they will accept it. It's what often happens. We're good neighbors, but we have our own life, our own friends. It's just a matter of time. And sometimes we have other people who are our neighbors, maybe somewhere else, whom we spend time, and that's okay. Doesn't necessarily need to be a geographical neighbors. But in any case, whoever we choose to be our neighbors, the relationship from earning respect to earning trust, and then to bring in the light of Jesus.
Well, I love how we were able to hit so many different talking points, which was essentially just one question. And I hope you all loved it as well. I'm glad that you were able to spend this time with us, spend this opportunity talking through the lesson with us, and we hope to see you again with the next one. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your neighbors so they can all hear the good news and the good words of our Lord and Savior. Thanks so much, everyone.